Welcome to another episode on the People Productivity Channel, where you are the product and a better you is a solution. Today we have on a very interesting guest, Bob Tiede. And Bob, maybe you could just open by introducing yourself.
Well, hello, Frank. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I'm Bob Tiede. I've been on the staff of CRU for 49 years, and I'm on the leadership development team. Our mission is to develop the next generation of leaders for CRU. But Frank, I frequently say, kind of more the elevator speech, that this is true for every organization, and that is in 15 to 20 years, almost none of our current leaders will still be leading. But that's true for every organization. In their places will be the leaders we're now developing. And if we fail, or any organization fails to develop that next generation, they won't fail as an organization tomorrow, next week, next month, or even next year. But they may fail 15 to 20 years from now. And history, sadly, is filled with stories of organizations, companies, for-profit, non-profit, who were once vital and flourishing, and 15 to 20 years later cease to exist in some cases, shell of themselves.
Yes,
when you dig around, it's always complex, but almost always there was no intentional development of the next generation. So that's what I'm about. I'm having the time of my life. And Frank, another thing is I have a blog, leadingwithquestions.com.
Yep.
And maybe we'll get into that story. But
well, I think, this whole topic of leading with questions is such a great topic. We're a channel where people come here to learn things that they can use and apply in their own life to do things better. And being a great asker of questions is so vital, I think. As a leader, it makes it all about the other person, which is just fantastic. So how did you happen to get so interested in questions?
Well, Frank, some people, hearing that I'm a blogger and have written 3 books related to leading with questions, think this must just be in my DNA. And in my newest book, Now That's a Great Question, it starts, the opening chapter is a confession. And the reality is that for most of my career, I was what I call a benevolent dictator. The only paradigm of leadership that I knew or thought of was that leaders needed to tell, they needed to direct. And the benevolent part is that a leader should also use please and thank you. And so instead of just saying, hey, you do this, it was like, hey, Frank, would you please, do this? Or team, here's what I've been thinking. Would you all please help us, do this? And then when people did, and my staff did great jobs, I would appreciate them individually as well as, in a team meeting. Hey, Frank, stand up. Hey, you all need to hear what Frank did this last week. Frank, thanks so much. But again, at the bottom line, I thought the job of a leader was to direct. And in 2006, I came across Dr. Michael Marquardt's book called Leading with Questions. And Dr. Marquardt, faculty of George Washington University, that book, Frank, was a page turner for me. And by the time I was done, it was like, oh my God, why hasn't anyone ever shared this with me before? Because the new paradigm was that a leader could actually be more effective in leading with questions rather than leading by telling. And he had so many examples, so many stories. I immediately embraced it. And I was already on the CRU leadership development team. I began to teach out of the book. In fact, I put an 8-session seminar together. And I became known as the question guy. And it was so helpful to so many.
And you've done 2 books.
Yes, that got me started.
Yeah, well, I love the fact that you've made these materials available, and we'll get to that, right? Anybody can go download now. That's a great question. Fabulous. So when, so you said you were a benevolent dictator and diminisher, right? Even though you thought you were multiplier. Why don't you just talk a little bit about that confession?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Um, Something that's become an annual event for me is the Willow Creek Global Leadership Summit, and hosted in Chicago, but it's broadcast to like 400 satellite locations. I've always attended at a satellite location in the Dallas area.
Hmm.
And a bunch of years ago, Liz Wiseman, author of the book Multipliers, was one of the speakers. And anticipating her message, I kind of went in thinking, hey, this is going to be good because she's going to be talking about leaders like me,
Yeah.
multipliers. Well, she started her talk talking about diminishers, and she began to talk about diminishers, define what diminisher leaders were like.
Hmm.
And of course, I would have never thought of myself as a diminisher. I'm a multiplier. But she said, well, the first thing that defines a diminisher leader is that when you bring them a problem, they solve it for you. And I thought, what? What do you mean? I mean, I love solving problems. I love it when my staff bring me a problem, especially when I know, crystal clear, here's what you do to solve that. And I always thought they left my office thinking, wow, Bob is so wise.
He's so helpful. Oh,
But she put that as a diminisher leader, a multiplier leader. She said, will let you solve your own problem. Well, then, second, she said, when you bring a diminisher leader a new idea, they always say, wow, Frank, great idea. But if you also were to add this and this and this, it'd be fantastic. And Frank, at this point, I'm sinking a little lower in my chair. And I'm thinking, you're going, wow, I always considered that a multiplier. It's like I love new ideas, and then I love to add horsepower to them, and we're collaborating. And I had no idea that my staff actually, after a couple of those kinds of conversations, left my office thinking, I'm never bringing Tiede another idea. No matter what I ever bring him, it's never good enough. And then third, she said, when you bring a diminisher leader, when a diminisher leader asks you to take on a new responsibility, they in essence want to give you the responsibility, but not the authority. And if you agree, they then want to give you the exact plan on how to do it. And Frank, at this point, I'm almost on the floor because I realized when I asked, Frank to take on a new responsibility, and Frank said, sure, I'd say, Frank, pull out a legal pad. This was back in that age.
yeah,
And let me, give you the plan. And again, I thought I'm being really helpful because I'm
sure.
giving Frank the plan. And she said, a multiplier leader is going to let Frank write his own strategic plan on how to get it done.
Hmm.
And so
Agreed. I mean,
that
it's
talk,
really great advice.
yeah, changed my whole paradigm again and realized, wow, the benevolent leader was not a multiplier, he was a diminisher. And of course,
Mhm.
Frank, all of us actually do want to be multipliers.
Yeah, at
But
the
she
end of
gave
the day.
a light that I had never had.
Amazing. Early on, I worked for somebody, and of course, a lot of times you end up with good mentors along the way. And he was like, ask a lot of questions. When people come to you, just keep asking questions. And yeah, I learned the power of that kind of early on. I think it's on the money. Nothing
I
worse
wish she'd
than
been my mentor.
yeah, yeah, nothing worse than having people tell you how to do your job, right?
Yes.
So, in your book, you talk about, leading with questions will be 10 times more effective if for a leader who does that rather than telling. Is that really factual? 10 times. I mean, it seems like an awful lot.
Well, it does, Frank. And, let me ask you a silly question, and I'll kind of get to where I'm going on this point. But, Frank, if you were in a rowboat, not a motorboat, a rowboat with your whole team, and it was a big boat, and there were oars for your entire team, and you wanted to get that boat across the lake as quick as possible, how many of them would you like to have row with you?
All of them.
Yeah, I said it's a silly question. Well, let me ask you then, and Frank, again, I know you do lead with questions, but that same leader sitting at their conference table with their whole team,
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to figure out what's the quickest way to get across the lake, only in this case, either to overcome a challenge or to take advantage of an opportunity. And so often the leader is the only one that has his or her oar in the water. In other words, they're the only one accessing their brain power, not muscle power, but brain power to figure out how can we get across this lake as quick as possible. Well, the leader who leads with questions to say, hey, gang, what do you all think? What might we do? Now is actually accessing the brain power of the entire team. And I always say to leaders, when you access that brain power, please understand you still can make the decision.
Yeah.
You're not just, giving away authority, but now you're hearing all sorts of ideas. And my experience is that I often end up hearing ideas like, wow, Frank, that's brilliant. I'd not thought of that. And then second, let's just say again, Frank, I'm sure if we worked together, I'd be on your team. But in this conversation, you're on my team and you share something and I'm thinking, wow, that's brilliant. I hadn't thought of that. So I then follow up with this, Frank, would you be willing to lead us in taking that initiative? And of course, Frank says, well, sure, Bob.
Super powerful. Be honored to do it, right?
Yeah. Well, Frank, whose idea will you be executing?
Your own.
Yeah. And Frank, how hard are you going to work to actually end up showing that your idea actually was a great idea?
Super hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've given you ownership of your idea versus me saying, hey, Frank, here's what I want you to do. And you're thinking internally, well, Bob's the boss, but I think that's a rather stupid idea. Well, you're going to execute kind of in a haphazard way. And if it doesn't work, you're kind of going to say, well, I didn't think that'd work anyhow. And so a leader who leads with questions gets, somewhere between 3 to 10 times more information. And then when you hear great ideas, being able to let people run with their idea. You see, so often, again, Bob, when he was the benevolent dictator, it's kind of like, well, Frank, the way to climb that mountain is this path. Well, the leader with questions lets Frank understand we have to climb that mountain, but Frank gets to come up with his own path on how to get there. And again, the multiplier leader begins to realize there are multiple ways to get there. But when Frank comes up with his own way, he's going to be highly motivated to make that path work.
Yeah, big time, big time. This whole notion of people moving from managing to leading, the question is one of the more important things that they have to learn, especially as they move up and have leaders under them.
Yes.
And getting them motivated. One of the things you do is that you encourage leaders to ask their staff what are the 3 or 4 events that have most shaped their lives. So maybe we could expand a little on that.
Yes. Well, I got that question from Cheryl Batchelder. Cheryl has become a friend. She's been a coach in one of our programs, but Cheryl was the CEO of Popeye's Chicken and wrote the book Dare to Serve. And it's absolutely the best book on servant leadership I've ever read because she actually illustrates it with the things she did at Popeyes. And so it's not just theory, you actually hear it and step by step. And but in that book, she asked this question, how well do you know your staff? Do you know the 3 to 4 events that have most shaped their lives? Well, when I heard that question, Frank, it was a new question to me, but I could hardly wait to find someone to ask it.
Yeah.
And the very next day, I was coaching one of my associates in Canada, and I've known Neil since 2007, and we're really good friends, and I really knew his whole story. And so in asking the question, I just thought, well, I'm going to be sharing a great question with him, and it'll be kind of fascinating. Of all these things I know about Neil, what will he say are the 3 or 4 that most shaped his life? I
Mhm.
didn't expect Frank to hear anything new, just kind of the order would be new.
Yeah.
And Neil said, well, Bob. And he got quiet, and we were on Skype, but we were seeing one another like you and I are.
Mhm.
He said, Bob, have I ever shared with you that my birth father died when I was like 9 months old? And I said, no, Neil, I haven't heard that story. He said, well, my mother later remarried, and the man who's really my stepfather is the man who, you know, in my heart is my dad.
Mhm.
Um, but he said, I've often been told, he said again recently, as maybe a couple months ago, by one of my aunts, that in the final days of my birth father's life, he knew he was dying. He was in a big bed at home, and every day he would ask to hold me. And
Mm.
as he would hold me, he would pray over me that God, the Heavenly Father, would be a father to this little boy that he knew he himself would not raise. And as Neil shared that, Neil began to have tears, and I began to have tears.
Mm.
And Neil shared, Bob, I think I came to Christ because of God honoring the prayers of my birth father. He
Yeah.
said, I think I'm in a ministry role today because of the prayers of my birth father. And Frank, I thought, wow, here was a relationship already good.
Yeah.
And with one question in 5 minutes, we went deep. And, you know, to all those listening, I want to say that I'm not going to promise you that every time you ask the question, you're going to get such an emotional response like I got. But every time I've ever asked it, it's fascinating,
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating.
I'm going to certainly use it going forward. I think it is an incredibly great
Well,
question.
Patrick Lencioni, in his book, 3 Signs of a Miserable Job, shares that one of those signs is to work someplace where you're not known. In other words, the
Mhm.
boss may know your first name. He may even at times not know that. He said it's easy to leave a job like that, but where we go to work and we're known,
Yeah.
there's where we begin to feel like, wow, this is a good place. And so, yeah, I would encourage leaders everywhere to just start asking. And again, one of those questions that you be intentional about, but it's not like you have to go ask them all of it, all of your employees today.
Mhm.
But over the coming weeks, you know, just say, hey, I'm curious, what would you say are the 3 to 4 events that have most shaped your life? And then listen, it'll always be fascinating.
Yeah. Really, really good question. I remember we were speaking earlier and you talked about Eisenhower and how
Yes.
questions were so important to him. Maybe you could elaborate on that.
Well, I can. The story for me starts at the Opryland Hotel, that big conference hotel in Nashville, and I was
Yeah.
spending time with the general manager, and he knew about leading with questions, and he said, Bob, do you know what Bill Marriott considered to be the 4 most important words in the English language? And I said, I do not know, but I said, I bet there's a story. He said, well, there is. And the connection, Opryland, is now owned and run by Marriott.
Okay.
And he shared that he'd started his career at corporate, and he got to know Bill Marriott. Um, and he said Bill shares the story that when he was 22 and an ensign in the Navy, he came home one weekend, and his father had invited then President Eisenhower to the family farm,
Hmm.
which was in Virginia, not far from DC, to go pheasant hunting on a Saturday morning. He said, well, that particular Saturday morning, it was cold, it was windy, and it was raining. And they're sitting around the breakfast table, you know, kind of thinking, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And young Bill Marriott standing over the fireplace. And at some point, President Eisenhower stands up, walks over to the fireplace and says, Bill, what do you think? And Bill Marriott determined those were the four most important words in the English language. Because as he thought about it, he realized that was the genius of President Eisenhower, the man who had been the five-star general, who had led the Allied troops' invasion of Normandy. And he realized, okay, how was it that Eisenhower was able to connect and get along with the leaders of France and Great Britain and Canada and the generals from France and Great Britain? Well, it was that Eisenhower was always curious to ask each of them, what do you think? Just as he asked Bill Marriott that morning, that simple question, what do you think?
Yeah, could there be a more challenging job than those egos at that time?
Yeah,
You know, General
absolutely.
Montgomery and all of those folks. It was a tough group to pull together.
Amen.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things you say is that you could teach any leader to ask, you know, great questions in 30 seconds. And that's certainly something that everybody would want to know about.
Well, Frank, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, sometimes as I'm speaking on leading with questions, I get the impression that people on one hand would like to lead with questions, but they imagine on the other hand that it will require getting a master's degree in questionology. And, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, that'd be great, but it's unlikely. And, you know, just like becoming a brain surgeon would be nice, but sounds like a whole lot of work, probably not going to end up becoming one. So I always share, well, who here would like to learn to lead with questions in 30 seconds? And when I'm speaking to an audience, you know, every hand goes up, and I bring someone up. Well, Frank, I'm going to bring you up right now.
Sure.
And I always say, I'm so glad, you know, I get their name. Frank, I'm so glad you came up because I just sense you have a photographic memory. All you'll have to do is to hear my 4 favorite questions one time and you'll have them memorized. Are you ready to go? And they're always a little bit nervous, but they say, sure. So Frank, here we go. First question is, what do you think? Second one is, what else? The third one is, what else? The fourth one is, what else? Frank, do you have them memorized?
Yes.
Can you share them?
Even I could do this.
Share them with us.
What else? What else? What else? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just dig
Now,
deeper.
I always say, Frank, that some of you are looking just a little bit skeptical, thinking, Bob, you can't ask, what do you think? What else? What else? What else? And I point out, of course not, but imagine a conversation. And I'm asking, hey, Frank, what do you think we might do about X, Y, or Z? And Frank begins to answer. And when Frank pauses, I say, wow, Frank, what else? And Frank's going to give me some more. And you can use various versions of what else. Frank again pauses. Hey, Frank, don't stop now. I'm taking notes. Please continue. And Frank gives me more. And I'm saying, wow, Frank, incredible. Please say more about that. And I also share that, you know, when we're asked a question on what do we think, something we all do instinctively without really thinking about it, but our first answer is we protect ourselves and we roll out the first answer and we're carefully reading the eyes and face of the one who asked to see if they are pleased, confused, how are they responding? And we'll actually, if it's a longer question, we'll begin to edit what we're saying based on what we see. But, you know, should I ask Frank what he thinks about something? And when you give that first answer, I say, oh, Frank, that's stupid. Everyone knows that. Well, you're not going to say another word. But when I say, wow, say more about that. Well, you're getting more relaxed. You're beginning to think, well, Bob thinks I'm really smart. I'm really wise.
Bob's actually interested. Yeah.
Yeah. And you'll actually get to their gold nugget. their very best thought on that third and fourth question. And so it's more than just what do you think? What else? Say more. Tell me more about that. And for a leader, remember I said a leader who doesn't know how to lead with questions, if they'll just take those 4 questions and start using them in their next one-on-one meetings, their next team meetings, to just simply say to either an individual or a team, hey, what do you think? Wow, what else? Say more. They will actually be moving towards leading with questions,
Mm-hmm.
and have done it by learning 4 questions in 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's good advice. I mean, anybody could do that without a doubt.
Absolutely.
Showing more and more interest in somebody is always a good thing.
Yes.
So that's powerful. And, they don't really need a master's degree in questionology. I think they just have to get your free ebook, leadingwithquestions.com.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's actually 3 free ebooks there, and 2 of them also free audiobooks, MP3s for downloading. But the newest one is Now That's a Great Question, and available in the ebook form, absolutely free. You just go to leadingwithquestions.com, and at the top you'll see a picture of the book. Click on that, enter your email, and you'll actually be sent links for all the resources that exist there. So you can, once you get that email with all the links, you can download the free ebooks, either one of these, and also the audiobooks, MP3. You can go to Windshield University if you have a commute, where you're listening like you listen to podcasts on your smartphone, having downloaded the books. The third book is 339 Questions Jesus Asked. And you'll notice it says compiled by Bob. It was actually written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All I did was pull out the questions from each of the 4 Gospels.
Yeah, fascinating. But I think everybody should take advantage of these resources. Phenomenal. And why'd you make everything free? Because most people today are always out trying to sell something on, Amazon.
Well, Frank, I guess for 2 reasons. My motivation is I love to help people. I love to serve leaders. And I love to serve not only leaders, but the people they're leading.
Mm-hmm.
And a quote that I love, not original with me, but is, when a leader gets better, everybody wins. And so for me, it's a bit like the MasterCard commercial. Rather than, saying, okay, I sold a book and I made another $3.
Yeah.
When I get an email back where a leader shares how much more effective they are, that they've made the turn like I once did of learning to lead with questions,
Mm-hmm.
and listening to their staff, those emails to me are priceless. And, my day job, I'm compensated for, and this has just begun to fit into everything I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've made it free. I've just felt led to do that. And the payment of getting, from time to time, emails or texts just sharing how much it's helped them is all the payment that I asked for.
Yeah, I tell you, I downloaded all of it. It's really good quality. Easy read too. So it's entertaining and enjoyable. I highly recommend everybody listening in download a copy for themselves. So, it's a labor of love. You just fell in love with questions and you've really mastered it.
Well, thank you, Frank. Thanks for, you continue that. You can become my director of PR for leadingwithquestions.com.
Yeah. So tell us about the Navy captain that took over a ship with the worst morale in the Navy, and he built it up to the best morale in 18 months.
Frank, I think you're going to like this too, because I'll be sharing 3 questions he used. And for everyone listening, you only need to hear his 3 questions once and you'll have them memorized. But when Captain Michael D. Ebershoff took over the command of the USS Benfold, I don't know how the Navy does the testing of morale, but and however they do it, morale on that ship was the lowest in the Navy. 18 months later, morale on that ship was the highest in the Navy. And the first thing Captain Abershoff did upon taking command is he had 300 interviews with 300 sailors on his ship. He spent about 15 minutes with each one.
Okay.
So this took a number of weeks to accomplish. But with each interview, he asked sailors on that ship 3 questions. And these are the 3 you'll have memorized upon hearing them once. He said, what do you like best about this ship? Second question, what do you like least? Third question, what would you change if you could?
Mm-hmm.
And wow, when I heard those again, Frank, I could hardly wait to start using them. It was like, wow, I can use these. They're simple. And Frank, just an observation about great questions is they often are so simple.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like earlier, what do you think? Here, what do you like best? What do you like least? What would you change if you could? Now, Captain Abershoff did not promise to make every change. But even at the end of that first day, he'd probably only interviewed maybe 10 sailors. But there was a buzz on the ship. The new captain's different. He actually cares what we think.
And you know, the questions work if the intention is right.
Yeah.
He wasn't just asking questions. He really did want to make it better. So people understand your intention.
And it didn't take long, Frank, and he heard things, probably even that first day, that caused him to say, what? What do you mean that's not being done on this ship? We're going to fix that now. And so they not only experienced a captain who asked and listened, they began to see changes on that ship that had come from their input. Now, again, he didn't promise to make every change he heard, but he certainly began to hear things that were like, I've said, what? We're going to fix that.
Yeah. And, you know, once you have that type of relationship established with the crew, the people that work for you, they're very willing to share everything as time goes on. You know, I'm sure he got continuous input. So there's a great, great lesson in leadership right there. Because, you know, going from the worst to the best isn't easy under any circumstances.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. He's written a book about that experience. Again, Captain Michael Abershoff. And oh, I'm so sorry. I think it may be It's My Ship, but it's something like that. I'm sorry I don't have it recollected at the moment.
So, Bob, do you have any other thoughts for our audience, other than they should absolutely get your free downloads?
Well, I have one other thought. Frank, if you're going to be a leader who leads with questions, what do you then need to do next?
Well, you need to follow up on the things for sure.
Even before then, might it be, it's so obvious, Frank, you got to listen.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
If you're going to ask a question, you got to listen. And here's a listening tip. It's one of the best ones that's helped me so much, but it's the 8-second rule. And of course, Frank, when you hear of 8 seconds, what do many of us instantly think of when we hear of 8 seconds?
The 8-second rule?
Yes. You and I talked about it earlier.
What, riding the bull?
Bull riding.
Yeah.
And again, you don't have to be a fan of bull riding, but you know, bull riders, to have a ride, have to stay on that bull for 8 seconds. You know, we can think 8 seconds is so short, but to a bull rider, it's an eternity. And if you've watched it at all, you realize only about 1 in 4 stay on the bull for 8 seconds. So at any rate, that's bull riding. Well, 8-second rule for asking questions is this, and research shows, Frank, and this is fascinating to me, that when most of us ask a question, we only wait 2 or 3 seconds for an answer. If they haven't answered in 2 or 3 seconds, the silence so drives us crazy that we have to fill the room with words so the silence can be gone. And so we ask a question. If they haven't answered in 2 or 3 seconds, we will either re-ask the question, ask another question, answer the question ourselves, or just move on. But here's the amazing part, with no awareness that we've just done that, no awareness that we only waited 2 or 3 seconds. And
Yeah.
so the 8-second rule is ask the question, relax, keep comfortable eyesight, not intense, and count to yourself 1001, 1002, all the way up to 1008. In fact, Frank, there's times I've gotten up to 1020.
Wow.
Here's the good news. The longer you wait, the better the answer. They will answer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, if I was in your office, Frank, and say, hey, which way to the men's room? I am expecting an answer rather quickly.
Yeah.
And you can give that quickly. But if Frank, if I was to ask, like, Frank, man, you've had a lot of experience. What would you say has been the 2 greatest leadership lessons you've ever learned? I probably need to give you 8, 10, 15 seconds because I've asked a question. You're going through a lot of files in your head, a lot of experiences.
Yeah.
Unless that's been a talk that you give, you're sorting through a lot. And if I'll patiently wait, I will be the beneficiary of a terrific answer.
Uh-huh.
So ask the question and wait. Apply the 8-second rule and understand that at times it will feel like an eternity to you to wait those 8 seconds. But wait, give them the gift of silence.
Yep.
They
Super
will
advice.
answer.
Super advice. And I noticed many times as a leader that, waiting, it does feel like this dead air, but people do answer. They come up with something.
They absolutely do.
They do. Well, Bob, listen, absolutely super, super advice. I hope all of our listeners have, really digested this and take just a couple of minutes to go get your ebooks and other content, because it's just a great, great variety of content that you share. So listen, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Frank, it's been my honor, my pleasure.
Yeah,
Frank,
great.
keep asking questions, Frank.
Will do, buddy, and keep writing all those good books. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.